Welcome. Hi, everybody who's joining live today. Welcome. Just adjusting my sound here. Greetings. And since we are already at the top of the hour, I think I'm going to officially begin. So just give me one sec to kind of clean up my little video section and my little pop outs and so on. And welcome everybody officially to this is April's wellness webinar. Every month we do a free wellness webinar on a variety of different topics. And this month we're going to be focusing on the science of food cravings. Talk a little bit about why do certain foods feel so irresistible and why cravings are kind of like a normal nutrition concern. And also just a quick trigger slash content warning because we are going to dive in a little bit into some disordered eating patterns slash binge eating disorder. So if that is a sensitive topic for you, please use your discretion as you're watching the webinar, or if you are tuning in the recorded version, obviously, feel free to skip ahead or fast forward ahead. So at the end of our session today, our webinar today, hopefully you'll be able to achieve what you see on screen here, understand a little bit about some of the mechanisms behind of what goes on with our food cravings, those little appetite cues, etc., something known as quote unquote food addiction. Is it real or is it not real? We'll find out soon. And also I'm starting to do every month now, I'm providing you with a freebie, a free handout of some sort. So this month I'm going to give you something to do a little self-reflection on if that is something that you think would be beneficial to you as we go through the slides and as you ponder on what you've learned after the fact, that hopefully you'll be able to kind of process this and see if that's helpful for you. Housekeeping thing. So as you heard, as you walked in here, as you logged in here, this is a session that's being recorded. You can use the chat box at any time, and there's going to be a little interactive section if you feel like you want to play along. Please feel free. Hopefully with the time allotted today, we'll also have a chunk of minutes or so at the end of this webinar to do some Q&A. If you have anything that you want to share, questions asked, doesn't have to be on this topic. It could be anything nutrition related. I'm happy to answer as best as I can, whatever is asked of me. But that said, this is not medical advice. Every time we do these webinars, just make sure you understand that this is just educational, informational. If you are undergoing anything as far as food, nutrition, physical activity, etc., is concerned, medicines, etc., please make sure that you're getting medical clearance to do so, and you check with your doctor or your own personal healthcare providers before you make any changes to your habits. And last but not least, when you register for these webinars, we do collect your information, your contact information, your email addresses, and I use that because these are recorded. Not everybody that signs up is able to come up live or join us live, so these are recorded, and then I send the recording link out. I send an email survey out as well, and then once a month I put you on my newsletter list and you receive a monthly newsletter. I try not to inundate your inboxes, but you are always able to opt out if you have had enough of me. That's totally fine. I won't take it personally, I promise. So here, if you've never met before, my name is Dina D'Alessandro. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I do a wide variety of things, as you can see on screen there. Most of the things that are taking up my time these days, I'm an adjunct lecturer at Lehman College in the Bronx. I see some of my students have joined me live, so hello to you for joining. And then I'm also the campus dietitian at the Student Health Center there as well. I do both in-person and virtual consultations for nutrition counseling, and I run and operate my own nutrition business too. So I do my private practice. It's about a part-time, maybe 10 to 12 or so patients a week, wide variety of insurances and across state lines as well. And telehealth, I'll share a little bit more about that at the end of today's discussion. And I also do independent contract work. So I get picked up and plugged in into things like health fairs and corporate wellness gigs. And I work with the New York City Department of Aging, doing similar things like this, wellness webinars with them as well, and a wide variety of things. I also work with a huge amount, dozens, hundreds of nutrition students and dietetic interns over the past almost 10 years that I've been a dietitian. So I feel very, very honored to be part of their lives and help them with their academic and their professional journeys. So let's start with today's conversation about food cravings, understanding a little bit about what this terminology means and how it's distinguished between that and what is considered true hunger. When you're looking at your needs, right, assuming you can recognize what your appetite is, there are going to be some physiological cues, meaning you might have stomach grumbling, you might start feeling a little bit dizzy or lightheaded when your body is actually craving energy. And if you remember some of our webinars in the past, we talked about how macronutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins equal calories, which equals energy, kind of like putting gas in the tank of your car so that you can do what you need to do over the course of the day, stay focused, raise your hands, breathe, etc. When it comes to cravings, however, those are probably a little bit more like specific foods, like something salty or something sweet. As you can see here, some examples like a chocolate, piece of chocolate or something chocolatey or sweet after dinner. Or if you're stressed out or emotionally attached to something, then you might start craving something like a salty snack. So those cravings are usually involving more specific foods, where hunger is typically a little bit more flexible and more related to a physical need versus kind of like a mental need for something. We'll talk here about the brain and reward system. So next month, spoiler alert, next month, I'm going to try to do as best as I can in the hour that I have usually allotted to these webinars to share with you all about hormones and health. But today, we're going to focus on this slide on something called dopamine. Dopamine is part of what are known as the happy hormones, DOSE, D-O-S-E. Bonus points if you know what that stands for. That's dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. But for this discussion here, we're going to focus on dopamine. So the thing that I found out about dopamine, there is a pleasure and reward system attached to it, especially when it comes to things that are known as like highly palatable foods, right? Things that make you feel good. There's a good feel to it. They're comforting. That's why they're called comfort foods as well. And there's that stimulant as well. Like you eat it, you feel joy. Sometimes you feel joy. In dopamine's case, as I read a little bit more about this particular hormone, it wasn't so much about the pleasure and the reward system as much of the anticipation that's related to it too. So you're looking forward to engaging in a pleasurable activity. You're looking forward to the feeling of satisfaction when you're eating something fun or that excitement. But here is where sometimes I feel like it doesn't hold up its end of the bargain because a lot of times, especially with people with whom I work who do have things like cravings or stress eating, emotional eating, that lasts a very short amount of time. Once they're done eating or giving into that craving, they start feeling guilt. There's some negative self-talk. There's some letdown. There might even also be physical discomfort depending on how much or what the quality of the food is, that it's no longer as pleasurable because their stomach starts hurting them, and that kind of defeats the purpose there. But dopamine, you can blame it all on that. So we have, oh gosh, this is, every webinar I go down a rabbit hole, and this is where I went down the rabbit hole for this one. Are foods actually addictive? Like, is there a reason and a purpose behind the food system and the food manufacturers of the world or the country? Honestly, the jury's out a little bit. According to, because I do a lot of research-based stuff when I'm sharing these webinars with you, according to a lot of the powers that be within the nutrition sciences world, I feel like it brings me back to a couple of different things. So we had a couple of different webinars in the past with like immunity, immune systems, and healthful habits and different kinds of approaches to, eating and mindfulness and so on. And the language that was used back then, we talked about the marketing terminology of things. And here's where I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect when it comes to the true reasons, definitions, etc., behind a term and the kind of like, generally facing the general population facing ways that people are seeing this information approach them. So in the immunity world, we talked about immune boosting foods. That's not a real thing. You don't boost your immunity because in the clinical sense, when you boost your immunity, that means you have an autoimmune disorder. There's something wrong with your immune system. And then it also reminded me too of this clean eating discussion. That's also not a universally defined or agreed upon definition for that term. What's clean eating? Minimally processed. I guess we can talk about that, and we'll talk a little bit too about processed foods here. And so here's where this rabbit hole this time around came up because this discussion around food addiction. So when we talk about clinical conditions, things that are actually diagnosed in our clinical world, whether you have high cholesterol or high blood pressure or diabetes, we get that from our doctors and our healthcare providers. We get that from something called the International Classification of Diseases. It's a database. The ICD-10 codes is what we call it. And that's how we document your charts as a patient. That's how we submit our information to the insurance companies for reimbursement. And that's how we diagnose you through those clinical codes. In the mental health world, because a lot of issues around food eating behaviors stem from a mental health disorder. And that comes from something known as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM. So officially, as of the time of this discussion, this webinar, this recording, The DSM has not acknowledged food addiction as an actual mental health disorder, but it has acknowledged things that are related to that. That's where eating disorders and disordered eating patterns come in. So this is where there's kind of like a disconnect, or the way that things are worded, language that are worded, articles that come out, is food addiction a thing, or why some foods feel addictive. I try to be really, really conscientious with the language I'm using around that, because it's not yet officially recognized. And I'm a science nerd, so I can only go by what the actual guidance is given. So that said, one of the things that I came across, you may have heard of this or not, is something known as the Yale Food Addiction Scale. And that provided criteria and a framework to present to the mental health professionals to enter in categories and a rating system around what is known as food addiction. So we'll see. We'll see maybe if someday the DSM-5 does end up including that. But a lot of these things are very person or patient reported, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how out of control do you feel? My 3 might be your 7. So it's really hard to gauge what indicates a place or a loss of control, or what triggers a craving to happen. So this is where it feels like there's a lot of nuance around this. Another thing that comes up here too is that cravings, right? Cravings, as we're discussing it here, usually in the salty and sweet world of foods, are mostly related or associated with something known as the ultra processed foods. I don't think I have this on my list of things to talk about this year, but at some point I might discuss what's known as the NOVA classifications, NOVA, NOVA classifications. They go into detail and categorize processed foods. And I'll share this with you a little bit later on too. But a processed food could be something like a corn chip, and an ultra processed food, I should say. It could be something like a corn chip, and an ultra processed food could be something like baby formula. So obviously, we're not talking about you desiring the need for baby formula. We're talking about those highly palatable foods that are mostly high in things like saturated fats, excess salt or sodium, and refined carbohydrates or added sugar. So those are the things that kind of like trigger those pleasure sensors. And people can experience addiction like symptoms while they might not necessarily be officially diagnosed with a food addiction. So examples of commonly reported addictive foods are things like, the typical things, right? Pizza, chocolate, ice cream, French fries, etc. And so here again, I think it's that combination of mouthfeel and kind of those pleasure sensors and that anticipation. But again, not everybody who engages in these types of craving behaviors ends up with a true eating disorder, or what's known as binge eating. Not everybody who engages in giving into cravings ends up with an overly excessive amount of caloric consumption, like they're not eating in excess of what their body needs. Not everybody who engages in cravings or giving into cravings ends up with weight gain because of the excess calories, or weight cycling because of that. So this is where I feel like it just needs, again, nerd alert, right? Just needs to have that distinction of, is it a true defined diagnosis versus something that we just kind of like to term that. And so we'll see in the future if that does end up being the case, if we end up putting a more concrete stamp on this particular situation. So I call this the madness, right? The mechanisms behind the madness, wide variety. I mean, just like anything, everything is very multifactorial. So we'll start off first with the biology of things. If you are craving something, there could be signs of the fact that you have some blood sugar fluctuations, like you've got spikes and drops in your day if you're not eating enough or you're not eating well-balanced meals. Sleep plays a huge role in almost everything we do. In fact, as a registered dietitian, I definitely address sleep habits, quality and quantity with my patients, because a lot of things like that can be related to those hormones that indicate whether or not we're feeling hungry. We have cravings, the way that we digest and metabolize foods. Hormones, again, next month we'll go a lot more deeper into this. But the hormones to keep in mind here, aside from dopamine, two ones called ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is, I call it the gremlin, right? The hunger hormone. I'm hungry, I want to eat. And leptin is its counterpart, where I'm satisfied, I'm full, I feel good. I feel like I can lay off of the food now. I'm feeling the ease of hunger wane a little bit there. So again, biologically speaking, these are things that potentially could trigger in your body that end up making you have a craving for something. And stress too. If you're the type of person who grabs and goes, stress affects people in different ways. Your blood pressure goes up. You might start biting your nails. Some people end up completely losing their appetite. Other people end up giving into their appetite. So a lot of these kind of cues that trigger those things can end up feeling like you end up with a food craving of some sort, or giving into a food craving. Environmentally speaking, so we're talking outside in the external world, or even outside within your internal world, what's available, what's at hand, what do you see in front of you? Marketing plays a huge role in this too. If you've ever gone grocery shopping, not just online, but like in a physical physical grocery store, right? Everything's at eye level. All the fun, good, colorful things are at eye level. What's at the cashier's stop along the way, those impulse purchases, right? You might not even be hungry at the time, but that looks so enticing. Portion sizes play a role in this too, because especially if you are eating out or doing takeout foods or having other people in control of your meals, portions are going to be large. So what you see in front of you, and we talked before, we talked about food habits as children and in your early days in your family. If food equals love, right? The more food, the better. Or if you're being held hostage at the table because you can't leave without cleaning your plate. Again, those portion sizes, I'm eating more than I really want to, and they may not be the best quality types of foods. And then habit cues play a role in this as well. I know I'm thinking in a cultural term too. As Italians, we have dinner and then we immediately have something sweet with a cup of coffee. So if you invite me over to your house just for food, at the end of that meal, I'm going to be probably sticking around being like, I don't understand. Is there pastry and dessert and coffee's going on? What's happening? So that's a trigger. That's a habit cue that's going on. Psychologically, on a related note, on the psychology end of things, the ways that we cope with things emotionally, again, that stress related coping mechanism, learned associations. This reminds me of Pavlov's dog. If you remember that scientific experiment, the bell rings, the dog salivates and wants to eat, right? That learned association. When I do this, then I do that. So those cravings can definitely be connected to what I call the thing before the thing, or the triggers and the cues that happen. And of course, the reward habits as well. So speaking of dopamine before, right? So that's where I think people liken this to the effects of drugs. It's like having, cocaine in your system when you're eating something sugary. And I get it, what they're trying to say, because something like a drug effect does activate those dopamine pathways. And then that response, that stimulation, that cue ends up being something similar that we feel in the world of food cravings. However, I would argue I don't think we're out on the street begging for cash to go buy a sleeve of Oreos, but that could just be me. So those are the three kind of like external factors. We try to look at things as a multifactorial, multiple influences, not just one thing, and where it really comes into understanding what goes on behind the scenes. If you're interested in learning more about that, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. Here is the practical strategies we're discussing. So if this is also kind of like a refresher, I think, of some of the previous webinars, because a lot of these things are not new information. A lot of these things you learned in kindergarten, you learned, in the last handful of years of watching these wellness webinars too. It's focusing on, as I like to say too, like what's missing from your diet, what's missing from your habits versus restricting things that you want to limit or avoid. And we'll touch upon that a little bit too, because I do believe that kind of plays a role, perhaps if you are dealing with cravings that feel a bit out of control. So the first recommendation is always try to eat a balanced meal. If you're doing a smoothie, if you're doing ingredients on a plate that kind of look like this, where you can see things separated out, it's always good to have a protein source with your carbohydrates or a fiber-rich food like beans or broccoli or leafy greens and a healthy fat of some sort, whether it's oil or nuts or salmon, etc. Those things are going to provide us with quality and quantity, making us feel a little bit fuller longer and having more of what we need, again, to kind of control those blood sugar spikes that come and go. Which brings me to my next slide here about stabilizing blood sugar. Even if you're not diagnosed with diabetes, that's okay, because blood sugar and hormones are going on in everybody's body. So when you are having those spikes and drops and spikes and drops, those crashes throughout the day, if you remember from one of the, was it the meal planning discussion or one of the other things that I did, macros and micros, maybe that webinar we did last year, a year and a half ago, we talked about kind of like a general rule of thumb is about 100 calories equals about an hour's worth of energy, especially if it is a well-balanced meal or snack. So not just an apple, but an apple plus peanut butter, or not just an apple, but an apple plus yogurt, right? Something that's paired up is going to help with making you feel a little bit fuller longer and more likely to stabilize those blood sugars, especially if you're going long periods of time between meals. So if you're the type of person that wakes up and has something at the crack of dawn, like I do, 7 o'clock in the morning is my first meal. My next meal is not until I get a break after things like this. If I'm doing private practice stuff or teaching, I don't get a break until about 2 o'clock. That is a long period of time to go without food. So it's not that I'm trying to force feed myself 1,000 calories first thing in the morning, but I'm having a pretty decent, well-balanced meal in the morning. And then I'm waiting until about 2 o'clock for my next meal. But somewhere in between there, I might stop and just have a little handful of something, handful of nuts, maybe half a protein bar. I might pop open a yogurt cup and maybe have a few spoons out of that. Again, just to help stabilize the blood sugar levels. And we're going to talk a little bit about this too in some of the coming slides as well to give you some more practical strategies. But that is my approach to how do I stabilize it. Doesn't mean you have to be grazing on food every 10 seconds, but just being more conscientious and figuring out when's the next time I'm going to eat and how am I going to stabilize that. Okay, can't say this enough. I said it before, even as a dietitian, I'm not a sleep professional. I have no credentials in sleep anything, but it's very, very important. Not only are you reducing your risk of neurodegenerative diseases by getting some bedtime habits into place, putting some routines in order, but you will also hopefully see it helps stabilize some of those triggers, those cravings, and it also any kind of erratic sleep habits, whether it's quality and or quantity, not sleeping enough, having waking up all the time and not being able to go back to sleep, not feeling refreshed, that can actually influence your digestion, your cravings, your metabolism, your body's ability to actually process food. And then in the morning time, you're going through those spikes and drops again, and kind of that vicious cycle continues. So getting your sleep in order, I think, is one of the main priorities too. All right, so here's where I want to address this kind of sensitively, because on the screen here, it's like keep temptations away. I am not a huge fan of like cheat days. However, I do understand that sometimes when people have, I don't know, and exciting things around them that feel like they're going to give into something, whether they consider them addictive or not, that it sometimes helps to do one of two things. Either get rid of it, right? If you feel like I can't live with this thing here in my house, it's taunting me, or I can't be around those types of things because I'll feel like I'll give in without addressing the root cause of what that trigger is happening and how you can help control that, then maybe the best thing is to just be more mindful and keep those things out of reach. Maybe you do end up saying, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to go out for some fun food. I'm going to do takeout on Saturday with my family, and I'll just save my little craving for then. And that's fine. The other way to do this is to limit some of those options, right? So you have it in your house, you have it available at hand, but maybe make peace with a little bit at a time. Allow yourself to include a smaller portion and not go completely overboard on things. And if I have the time to do this today, we're going to do a little case studies on a couple of things that one of the examples is going to be related to this thing. Next up is mindful eating. We talk about this a lot too. We had a whole webinar on this, oh gosh, a couple of years ago, I think. Even if you don't recognize hunger and fullness, as we age, whether we're on medications, sometimes people are just naturally not in tune with hunger and fullness cues. But mindfulness is a different thing. Like really sitting and recognizing, am I enjoying this meal? It feels nourishing. Am I chewing until it's liquefied so that I give my body a little bit of a break on the way to digestion? I don't end up feeling like I have, a literal lump in my throat because I'm just like swallowing whole portions of food, mindfully assessing, what is the real reason I'm eating right now? Is it because I'm socializing? Is it because my body's telling me I'm craving something? Is it because I have vitamins and minerals that I need to input and this feels like a very nourishing experience? So again, just kind of like giving yourself a beat when you sit down. Some people use to say grace, they'll say grace and they'll give themselves a moment to be grateful for their food. And or if that's not something that you do, just before you eat, just kind of like take a look, count the colors, take a look at all the things, think about the people who brought the food there for you, and then what your role is that you're playing when you sit down to eat. Now, here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about eating disorders, disordered eating habits. So if this is something sensitive and you want to step away, or if you're watching the recording of this, if you want to fast forward, here's where you'll do that now. As I said before, we have clinical diagnoses and with mental health diagnoses. On the mental health ends of things, you'll hear things like anorexia nervosa, binge eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, ARFID, which is avoidance restrictive or like selective/picky eating, and the list goes on. There's quite a large category or subcategories within the eating disorder world, and there's also disordered eating patterns that are not necessarily diagnosable in that more specific way. If you feel like these, I always say look for patterns, right? Like once in a while, whatever, or especially for females, if you get your period, you might feel like, craving for something or that stress reaction. But if you are really feeling specifically with cravings, it would probably be most tied into something known as binge eating disorder, meaning that you're eating an excess amount of calories that your body needs, and you're probably doing it in a way that is those high fat, high salt, high sugar foods. Also with this, you might even be doing it in hiding. So you're sneaking things or you're separating yourself away to indulge in those large quantities of not great quality foods there. If you feel like it's out of control. So here again with that language around the quote unquote addiction, if you feel like you can't stop yourself from giving into those cravings, this is where I would encourage you to seek out extra support. And you're noticing cycles of stuff happen, but it tends to be more often than not. So like the rule, not the exception. So, yes, as a registered dietitian, I'm happy to help. My colleagues are happy to help you with this too. However, we're not always 100% fully qualified on this. And that's where, when we talk about the qualifications and credentials of healthcare providers, we recognize that while we have the experience and the skills and the academic wherewithal of understanding the aspects related to food and nutrition as it can help with medical nutrition therapy, as what we call it, we only get about one semester's worth of counseling experience. So some dietitians go above and beyond. They go for different credentials and they get extra skills or extra certifications, and they are known as eating disorder dietitians. They work with people usually in either inpatient treatment centers or outpatient treatment centers as well. But always, 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 because at this point now, if it is a formally diagnosed eating disorder, like binge eating disorder is, you will almost always have somebody that is going to be a behavioral therapist, psychiatrist, et cetera, that's going to be working with you. So a dietitian can be part of that team, or a dietitian can have the credentials, but I know I'm not qualified to go into the eating disorder realm unless I'm working with a therapist. And quite honestly, especially in my case, I might hand someone over to a more specialized dietitian because I might accidentally use language that triggers the condition or makes things even worse. Like I just got done talking about, calories or tracking food and patterns, and somebody with a true eating disorder diagnosis might not want to hear that, and it might make their condition a little bit worse. I would much, very much encourage you. Don't Google things. Don't ChatGPT your therapist, please. Don't let ChatGPT be your therapist. I should say, like, reach out to an actual person. I understand sometimes it's really hard to do that especially in this country. We don't have a lot of healthcare that leans towards supporting the services of people like dietitians or even therapists. You might have to do out-of-pocket payments for this, but you could also find maybe a community center or groups that do free workshops or free support on this stuff that you can then reach out and get help, or talk to the healthcare providers that you do work with if they can give you referrals if you do feel like it's going in that direction. Okay, we have time. I'm going to go through, especially since I know some of you are my students on here, I'm excited. We're going to go through some case scenarios. So we did this last year, complementary and alternative medicines webinar. I gave you a couple of case scenarios and we went through and kind of like talked about how some of those factors are related to, the approaches of what those people were dealing with their clinical conditions. Today, I'm going to introduce you to three fictitious people. These aren't real. I mean, they're real people in that they're stock photos from Canva, but they're not actual people or patients that I know. So this is Maria, my fictitious patient. She's 48 years old. She is addicted to sugar as far as she knows. There's a little quote down here: once I start eating chocolate, I cannot stop. I must be addicted to sugar. I've tried cutting it out completely, but that just makes me want it more. So in Maria's case, as you can see in this little green box here, she skips breakfast. Okay, or her first meal of the day doesn't start until 2 p.m. In that time, all she's doing is drinking coffee. I don't know if she takes milk or sugar with it. We forgot to ask her. And then she eats dinner 6 hours afterwards, right after her first meal of the day at 2 o'clock. We'll call that lunch, or in Maria's case, it might be just a first meal. And then she eats her next meal or dinner time is around 8 o'clock at night. She is feeling out of control at that point. So if you were to work with Maria, or if you were to know who Maria is, what would you think, based on all the stuff we just learned about in these past slides, what would you think some of her issues are? Or maybe pinpoint one issue that you think Maria is dealing with right now. Is it that sugar is, in fact, chemically addictive? Is it that she has lack of willpower? She doesn't know how to control herself? Is it C, she's dealing with restriction and she's under eating or under fueling, so she's not getting enough calories in her body? Or is she dealing with some sort of emotional instability factor? So if you wouldn't mind, I see hands raised, so I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind, instead of speaking out, because this is recorded and it will eventually end up on the YouTube channel. So just to be protective of and respectful of all of you out there, stick it in the chat. Do you think it's A, B, C, or D? Let's take a look at what your Hi everybody. Hi everybody. What you think Maria is currently dealing with, and in the interest of time, I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to say it's C. And I'm going to say the reason why. what Maria is dealing with right now, right? We talked about the blood sugar stability stuff. So the blood sugar dips, that increases that sensitivity to the reward, the anticipation, oh, I can't wait to feed myself. But in Maria's case, she's just looking at the chocolate and the candy and forgetting I should have probably eaten something earlier in the day. Skipping meals, again, that hormonal factor, not just dopamine. We'll learn more about this next month, but that ghrelin, right? The gremlin starts rearing its ugly head saying, feed me. And again, she's giving into some of those cravings, those very highly palatable foods that make her feel comforted. Restriction can also amplify those cravings too, right? So again, I'm desperate for whatever. I haven't eaten anything all day. And then loss of control is often what's known as a rebound physiology. It's not technically an addiction rather. She is like her loss of control after she's done with the craving of stuff. Again, that's just her body saying, I need something. Like you forgot to eat earlier. Hello. So it's not a true addiction that she's going through. So I wouldn't necessarily blame sugar. And if you know me, no foods are off limits unless you are allergic to them. But addiction implies like a substance abuse driven hijacking type of thing. This to me feels like underfueling. Thank you, everybody who's chiming in. I appreciate that. And maybe I've taught you well if you have learned that from me. Thank you so much. All right, next up we have Daniel. Daniel's 32 years old, and he is on this ultra processed bandwagon. He's like ultra processed foods, they're the devil in disguise. They're designed to hook us, and they make this addiction type of reaction happen. He loves watching YouTube and TikTok videos. He sees a lot of these that are claiming that food companies are purposely engineering chips. In his case, potato chips are kind of like the thing that he's dealing with, where Maria had the chocolate, he has the chips. And he's saying it's going to override our brain chemistry. So there's something physically, chemically in those chips that's going to override our brain chemistry. So now he's avoiding all packaged foods. And listen, if you know me, like all packaged foods, like bread, canned goods, like I don't understand. So I don't know what it is that he's trying to only eat, but he's avoiding anything in a package. In grocery shopping, now he's starting to get anxious, right? He's got that food fear happening in him, and he spends hours reading labels. So he's just sitting there scanning through every single thing, comparing, contrasting. If he does give in, if he does eat something that he considers to be processed or ultra processed food in this case, he feels guilty, right? So now he's doing that negative language, self-talk, etc. So again, let's assess Daniel. If you were looking at his list of potential issues that we're looking to address in Daniel's case, is it that is his dopamine response? Okay, that's his, little bing, his little hormone, happy hormone going off. Is it his rising food anxiety that we might need to address? Or is it the food industry? I mean, listen, you can have more than one answer if you want to. You know how I feel about the food system here, but let's just say one answer is the best answer. Or last but not least, is it really those the addictive type of ingredients that are in snack foods that are causing his issues? What are we going to address with Daniel? So feel free to put in the chat A, B, C, or D. What do you think is the main issue right now that if we were going to be Daniel's friend or Daniel's healthcare provider, what might we want to address first with Daniel? I would say so too. I think in Daniel's case, you know, all pleasurable experiences are going to activate that dopamine. So whether he wants to jump out of a plane or eat a bag of chips, he's going to get that happy hormone kicking in. Food companies, all right, listen, I'm not affiliated with any food manufacturers, but I will say this. They do optimize taste, but I'll tell you something. I go to some really fancy restaurants in New York City, pay top dollar for a lot of my food sometimes. That is also highly palatable. They are also adding a lot of butter and a lot of salt in there. Are they doing it because they want to change my brain chemistry? No, they want it to taste good. And quite honestly, sometimes the food additives that are in there are to make things shelf stable as well. They don't want things going bad. So, the choices you make, depending on your budget, etc., sometimes it is what it is. But in Daniel's case, he's being influenced by those TikTokers and those YouTubers that are maybe giving him some mis and disinformation. So I would probably say let's try to address his food anxiety first. Let's try to see if we can have him make peace with food. Let's see, he could be an educated consumer for sure, but there is something. So again, talking about the eating disorder world, technically not an official diagnosis, but there's something known as orthorexia, meaning that somebody is obsessive over like health, health, health all the time. And they're very, very restrictive or super disciplined because it's fear-based narratives that they're dealing with. Like, I have to do this or I have to compensate for something. I'm not a good person, right? So again, there's a connection to morality in some way that the choices you're making is causing you to be super strict in your behaviors. And also, I mean, chronic stress, right? Like anxiety over food, anxiety over anything, chronic stress can affect health more so than can a bag of chips, right? That blood pressure is not going to be doing any better if you're stressing over what you can eat. Okay, next up, our last case person of today's conversation is our friend Eric here. He's 77. Kind of like Maria in a way, right? I can't keep snacks in the house because if it's in the house, I'm going to eat the whole bag or the whole package. So he keeps none on hand all week. And then he does like the cheat day thing where he ends up binge eating, over consuming on the weekend. And so, in Eric's case, what do you feel might be the true cause for concern here? What do you think we might want to address with Eric? Or what do you think, if you're a friend or his healthcare provider, what might you look at? Is it he really has an addiction to this particular substance? Is he dealing with what's known as a restrict binge cycle, right? Nothing for the week and then binging on the weekends. Is he have a genetic defect, something in him that's like, something's not working correctly that he ends up having to be like, I can't stop at one? Or is it that lack of self-control, lack of willpower? So in Eric's case, you want to put in the chat A, B, C, or D. What do you think is the thing that we might want to address first in Eric's case? Ding dong, ding dong, ding. I'll play my little Jeopardy. Oh, you know what? I can't play Jeopardy theme song because I don't have license to that, and this is going to be on YouTube eventually. Yeah, I would say in Eric's case, B is probably the thing too. We're looking at that restrict binge issue, and some of the issues here that you're looking at is, restriction increases that preoccupation. I mean, when we were kids, you can't have this, or you have to do the thing first before you can have it, and it's like that's all I can think of now is all I want is that thing I can't have, right? It sounds so kind of like immature, but that follows us along our whole life. Scarcity, right? Scarcity mindset, abundance mindset, thinking you're restricting of something. Again, that increases that once I get it, oh, it's going to taste so good. I'm going to love it. But we just got done saying before, and in Eric's case too, after he binges whatever those things are he was depriving himself of, I can't imagine his stomach's going to be too happy. Habituation occurs with consistent exposure. So this is something too that we talk about with children, with picky eating and kids, right? Allowing them to be in the room and get familiar and comfortable with many, many things over and over again before they decide if they want it or not, or sample different things. So, like I said before, if you feel like, I can't have it in the house, I get that, but I would try to like challenge you to see if you can make peace with it being there and seeing how you could be portion appropriate or sharing it with somebody. I bought this whole bag of chips. Why don't we split it up among us, like bring it to work, etc., hand it out. And again, the last thing when it comes to that word addiction that I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around is that substance addiction models don't really map out the same way that food does. So this is why I try to be careful of the language, but I understand this is just how it's used in mainstream conversations, articles. I mean, even, like WebMD might use the word food addiction or the term food addiction, even though it's technically not really a thing. I hate to say it. Okay, give me a sec. Let me check out the chat because all of you are so chatty here today. I'm so happy to see this. Hello, everybody. Yeah, fasting for too long. We were talking about Maria. Sugar crashes, Chris, thank you. Sugar crashes for sure. We're not getting a balanced breakfast, so everything's spiking and crashing. Christine, thank you. Yes, the restriction part of it too. Yep, there you go. The happy jolt of energy when we're talking about Maria before with kind of like that caffeine. Thanks, everybody. A lot of people like Daniel encourage him to reflect on the individual products. Yeah, exactly. Dry pasta is not a Dorito chip. Exactly, exactly. Yep, true. Thank you so much, everybody, for chiming in. I'm so happy to see everybody being so interactive and engaged. I appreciate that. So, like I said earlier, I'm getting in the habit myself of every month giving you a freebie, a handout to take with you. So I'm going to do that and I'll share that kind of what it looks like in a second. But if you do feel like you're struggling with food cravings, right? If you feel a little bit like a loss of control around certain things like this, I would probably say, just like anything, give yourself a micro goal. That's what we're doing lately. We've been talking about micro goals, like, the 3-3-3 rule. 3 days, try to implement something new. 3 weeks, try to be consistent at it. 3 months, hopefully it'll kick in and it'll replace or be included as replace an old habit or be included as a new habit. So again, just to kind of recap some of the stuff we talked about earlier about how do you help with keeping those cravings at bay. Look first at your balanced eating patterns. Are you including things that help you feel fuller longer and have a little bit more diversity in your diet? And maybe set a timer, like every few hours, just kind of check in with yourself or say, like I do, right? It's going to be 10 hours before I eat again. I definitely have to give myself a little something in between those things before the ghrelin monster starts opening its head. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Okay, listen, this is something I'm struggling with because I'm juggling quite a lot of things. Sometimes there's a sacrifice that happens and it shouldn't be sleep. So I really want to get to recommitting to this. 7 to 8 hours, I don't know what that is. I don't know her. I only know maybe five hours these days. But A consistent bedtime routine is always helpful. It's said research-wise, it's said to have a consistent bedtime routine and a consistent wake up. Sometimes that doesn't work if you have like an erratic schedule or you do shift work or something like that. But try to be consistent with the way that you enter into bed, the way that you wind down, quiet the mind. Do a brain dump, brush your teeth, put your jammies on, close all the screens, right? Get prepared for tomorrow. That's helpful in just putting the mind at ease, and hopefully you can have a better restful night. The awareness, we talked about mindful eating too. Kind of if you have the luxury of time, not everybody does, but you can afford 12 seconds before you make a decision of what you want to eat or when you're about to sit down to eat something. Just kind of look down, just be like, hello, food. I think this is what I'm going to do with you today. Ask your body too, is this really what I need right now? If I do give into it, is it going to feel really bad later? Or am I going to feel okay with that? Am I going to end up feeling guilty or using negative self-talk? Or I'm going to be like, you know what? I made a decision. I feel good about it. May not have been the best decision, but I'll course correct tomorrow. And then some of those environmental tweaks. If you feel like you need to get rid of something in your house, that's totally fine. But like Eric's situation there, I might recommend try to make peace with it, try to live with it, try to see if you can have some exposure therapy to that and get used to things being your house that might otherwise feel kind of tempting. Your call on that. Okay, so here's a little screenshot of what the handout's going to look like. It's a two-pager. One side of it is going to have some little check boxes if you want to make copies of it as you go, if you feel like you want to keep it on hand or share it with people that you know who might be dealing with some of these cravings and finding out, is that a real true thing or is it just hunger? Some practical tips with helping support those habits, like we just went through in today's discussion. And then there's also a little reflection section. I am not ever going to force people to track, weigh, measure anything, but I do love experimenting and collecting data and looking for patterns and analyzing things. Like I am generally curious about stuff. Like, why do I XYZ? Or does this really happen all the time? Or am I saying it happens all the time? And then I can kind of track and document certain things. So if you feel like things are getting a little bit out of control, this might be a good way to do that. Just take a look at patterns and then kind of analyze those things. So, as some general guidelines to kind of go along with that, I get it. Today's Thursday in the time of this webinar and this recording, but in the next week, in the coming week, maybe think of a food that you have labeled addictive. Like, do you really mean that you're addicted to it? Or is it just something that you're like, ooh, once I eat one, I can't stop eating? What could potentially be one of those factors, the multi-influencers that come in? Is it biological? Is it psychological? Is there an environmental explanation instead? And again, just lead into curiosity. I'm curious about why I have these reactions. I'm interested in observing what's going on in my life. And then in the following week, see if you can kind of reflect on that. Are there patterns? Oh, this equals that. A trigger ended up with a reaction. Did something cause me to give in or influence the way that I was eating or having those cravings? And then if I implemented a strategy, did it work? That's a lot of feedback I get these days. Sometimes it sounds like the silliest, simplest things that can help just make the tiny little correction or modification in your eating habits. And then it's like, you know what? I've solved the puzzle. I've been able to now take control over this. So at the end of every webinar, because we are coming up on the end of the webinar, at the end of every webinar, I always ask you to kind of think about what we discussed today. You don't have to share this publicly if you don't want to, but what is something you want to start or keep or stop? If it's something you want to start doing, like implementing a new bedtime routine, maybe you make a commitment to that, write that down in your journal or in your planner or on that handout that I'm going to give you. If it's something that you're like, I'm already spot on, I'm doing a great job, this is already integrated as a regular habit, that's something you can keep doing. Validate yourself, good for you. Something you want to stop doing, like stress eating or, kind of checking through your emotions there, then that's something you can implement as well. Like I said, I tend to be more what's missing from my world. And then eventually, as I integrate that new thing or that more regular habit, all the other things kind of like scooch over and then don't become as big of a deal anymore. All right, some shameless self-promotion, friend. But listen, I do this for everybody. I am really, really proud of the last 10 years of being a dietitian. And I mean, even before that, I was doing, blogging about food and nutrition and things that I found interesting. But I've amassed on the District Dina YouTube channel quite a lot of content, a lot of different topics. There's even what we call these little four week fast track playlist things that we have there, where it's like, how to meal plan, how to handle your blood pressure, like little mini courses, and it's all for free. So check out the playlist, the videos. I also used to host podcast for about 5.5 years, and there is dozens of episodes that are now loaded up onto YouTube where I've interviewed, sports dietitians, physical therapists, random strangers I met on the internet, and they're also fascinating, a wide variety of topics and information that I would love to share with you. So please feel free to like, subscribe, comment, share, do all those things to help get the word out and help expand whatever education information I want to get out there. If you do require some professional help, I'm here to serve a wide variety of patient populations. I work across state lines. I do 100% telehealth and I take a lot of insurance. I'm very happy about that. Not all insurances are created equally, but I digress. But I'm out there for you. So you can always hop onto my dishwithdina.com website and check out my services and book a session with me if you want to. If we're not a good fit or if I'm not in network with you, there are other people that I can help put you in touch with or refer you out because I want to make sure that people can support you as part of your team. All right, my friends, that wraps up today's webinar. We have some time for, I think we have a handful of minutes for Q&A if there's anything that is scratching at you that you would like to address or comment on. Otherwise, next month, usually we do this the second Thursday of every month from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern time. So next month on Thursday, May 14th, we're going to talk about your hormones, your health. I'm already overwhelmed by the amount of information I've started looking into this because there's like a bazillion hormones, but I really want to try to keep it focused on things that feel more popular, I guess. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that next month. And I appreciate everybody for being here. As always, I'd like to also thank not just you for showing up or you who are watching this, if this is the recorded version of this, either after the email is sent out after today's webinar or in a couple of months when I post this publicly on YouTube. But I like saying thank you to all the researchers and the people that put the information together because it's important for me to share with you research-based, evidence-based information so that we know where all this stuff is coming from. And I try to be very, very current with what I'm looking at too, and I love learning. All right, so here again is next month's discussion. And if nobody has anything else, questions, comments, or feedback, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. I hope you treat yourselves well, eat well, be well, and I'll see you again next month. Bye, everybody.